52 minutes. That's how long President Obama's audience with Pope Francis lasted. The Vatican tells us they talked about religious freedom, life, and conscientious objection. Well, after that meeting, we heard from President Obama twice. First, after meeting the Pope, and then with the Italian Prime Minister. Have a look.
My day started with the great honor of meeting His Holiness Pope Francis. And like people around the world, I've been incredibly moved by his compassion, his message of inclusion. I was grateful to have the opportunity to speak with him about the responsibilities that we all share to care for the least of these, the poor, the excluded. Thank you, Prime Minister Renzi, for your very kind words. As the Prime Minister indicated, we focused on the situation in Ukraine, something I've been talking about over the last 3 days. The sanctions that the United States and the European Union have imposed will continue to grow if Russia doesn't change course. But as I said yesterday in Brussels, we are continually hopeful that Russia walks through the door of diplomacy. So, Mr. Prime Minister, thank you for your friendship and your leadership. I'm confident that together we can build on the progress that we've already made, and I'm even more confident that the bonds between our two nations will continue to grow, rooted in the enduring friendship between our two peoples.
OK, let's find out more about what President Obama did in Rome today with the BBC's Catty Kay, who's there. Catty, tell us what else the President did in the last 24 hours.
Well, he came here to Rome. He met Pope Francis for the first time in the Vatican building just behind me. The two men met for 50 minutes, and President Obama told us that the conversation was dominated by issues of conflict around the world. They touched on the Middle East and Latin America. They also talked about Ukraine, and they also, as we heard there from the President, talked about income inequality. That's an issue that the two men have in common. It's something that President Obama says he's trying to address back home in the United States, and of course that Pope Francis is trying to address as well. Now, that's not to say that there are not different issues of differences between these two men. When it comes to abortion, when it comes to contraception, to President Obama's healthcare reform and whether that forces some religious organizations to give people contraception. But those issues, the President said, didn't come up directly with the Pope. They came up with other Vatican officials. I have to say, I spoke to one White House official shortly after the meeting, and I can only describe his reaction as giddy. These are jaded White House officials who are used to meeting leaders around the world, Ros. They were thrilled to be in the room with the Pope.
There's been another development in the Ukraine story which we must talk about, because today the UN General Assembly has voted through a resolution that labels Russia's annexation as illegal. Let's go live to Kiev and speak to the BBC's David Stern. Strong words from the UN General Assembly, David, but in practical terms, what difference does this make?
Well, yes, it's a non-binding vote, so in practical terms it means very little. Nevertheless, Ukrainian officials have hailed the vote. They see this as another vote of support for their position. It was a very strong vote. More than half, 100 of the delegates out of the UN's 193 delegates voted for it. The Ukrainians say that they hope that this will convince Russia to change its political course. Of course, it's not really clear what will convince Russia right now. We have the sanctions from the European Union. We have the sanctions from the United States. Russia, of course, has now absorbed the Crimea, and there's now worries about what's going to happen in the eastern part of the country. So obviously this is a welcome news from the Ukrainian officials, but it's not really quite clear what this will, if this will indeed change President Vladimir Putin's mind.
David, good to speak to you. Thank you very much. There's David Stern in Kiev.